Hey everyone, Lynn Fairchild-Hawks here. We're going to talk about developing Socratic questions for effective discussions in e-studies. So basically what Socratic discussions are about is teaching critical thinking, and we want you to create discussion experiences where students are really thinking about the essential understandings and concepts of your discipline. So let's talk about how to write these types of questions and prepare them for live sessions and asynchronous discussion forums. So every type of class has essential driving questions and essential understandings or generalizations that come out of it. And anytime you design any unit of learning within your 7-week course, we want to make sure that there's a driving question for the week that kids are grappling with at some point during the week. And essential questions, you know it's an essential one when you are having the kids wrestle with key problems, themes, or concerns that are relevant outside of just this class. They are open-ended, why, how, what if, what type of questions. They're non-judgmental, neutral, getting kids to explore ideas, and they defy a single obvious answer. So when you know the kids are going to get to a fever pitch of discussion on this, it's a good question. These are interdisciplinary questions. They provoke new questions. They're things that, after you're in a live session discussing them, you could move over to a Padlet or to a discussion space and discuss them further. And so this sparking of discussion requires evidence gathering, and ultimately, these great questions are not only just for discussion, they could also drive your assessments, so kids are creating meaningful products and performances. Here are just some examples of essential questions that are great, that could drive a great project, that could drive a great discussion or a great live session experience. Just taking this one, for example, which is an ethics question that has to do with science, you're asking kids to look at various authors and texts, TED Talks, where people are communicating a point of view on ethical, moral, and medical implications of cloning. And kids have to ask, well, why did this particular researcher design his study this way? Those are the kind of things you want them to dig into evidence as they try to answer this big essential question, a Socratic question of, is it acceptable to clone human beings? Now, when you're designing these questions, they need to be concept-driven. There has to be a great concept behind it. So, how do you find those? Well, first of all, you know it's a concept when it's one word, and it's a very abstract, infinite, vague word. One that makes you ask more questions. Ones that make you analyze, synthesize, evaluate. And that the answer, as you're trying to define this concept, leads to generalizations or essential understandings. Basically, you're arguing a point. Here are some great examples of concepts. I bet you that the course you're teaching deals with one of these words at some point. So whenever you're designing, whether it's a lesson in a unit of study or an actual discussion prompt, you're going to need concepts. So if you'd like, stop the presentation at this point and take a moment to jot down some abstract, ill-defined words, i.e. concepts, that maybe it's just some that you just saw, to really get a sense of what concepts drive my discipline. Here's some more. Are any of these applicable to your course? So, what are the implications for your curriculum and instruction? You should be checking to see if the course you're teaching really lets kids spend the time there with you uncovering generalizations, coming to conclusions based on these driving questions. They should be playing the roles of the discipline, whether it's a doctor or a novelist or a scientist of some sort, a mathematician, that get at the heart of the subject matter, those driving questions. Now, this whole process, whether they're working on an assessment or in a live discussion or asynchronous discussion with you, this is Socratic inquiry. And we had good old Socrates as our model. Many of you know details about his life, but he was the guy that always pushed the gadfly to know more and saying, I know absolutely nothing. And in the 20th century, you might have heard of Mortimer Adler, but he created a program of Socratic inquiry around classic texts from the Western canon. And this method, no matter what texts or materials you're using, this method is applicable. Also, Dr. King was a key person in Socratic inquiry, and he even hearkened to it in Letter from Birmingham Jail and in other impassioned speeches about justice and human rights. He talked about Socrates and the Greeks living in an unfettered realm of creative analysis and objective appraisal. That is the spirit of what we want to create in the e-studies learning community when you get kids to grapple with ill-structured, ill-defined ideas. So, we often teach in 3 or more ways, but I want to focus on 3 ways that we teach and talk about how what we're talking about today is not didactic or coaching. Now, didactic is great. When you're in a didactic mode, you want kids to acquire knowledge by means of lecture, reading a text, watching a video in order that they can know and remember. And you're teaching them terms. You're teaching them definitions, procedures, and formulas. Now, that's the acquiring knowledge phase. Kids need to go through that stage. You also need to be in coaching mode so they can develop skills. They need to go through exercises where they apply, analyze, evaluate, and synthesize, all the way up Bloom's taxonomy. And they should be problem solving, thinking critically, communicating. You have the Bloom's verb task list that you can look at to kind of calibrate what types of verbs we're talking about here. Now, then there's maieutic, or Socratic. Now, this is what we're talking about today, how kids can enlarge their understanding by means of Socratic questioning. What's the goal here? To explore ideas, okay? It's not about the right and perfect answer, but it's taking them through a process of inquiry where they analyze, evaluate, and synthesize. Maieutic, by the way, has to do with midwifery, or being a midwife, bringing something to light, creating ideas together. So, essential questions that we were just talking about and concepts are so key when you're in the maieutic or Socratic mode of teaching. Now, typical learners, this is the foundational learning. They need to stay in knowledge, understanding, apply, analyze, evaluate, create in that mode, sort of that hierarchy, but they can also cycle in and out of each of the phases. But when we are designing curriculum for gifted learners, we need to hang out at the bottom, okay? Creating, evaluating, analyzing. We need to start with questions like that right away because they can handle very quickly the knowledge, understand, apply realm. Didactic verbs for questions. Now, if you're in didactic mode of teaching, you want to remember terms, definitions, methods, procedures, then you can kick off with a verb like this. These are obviously not Socratic inquiry questions, but tell them to draw, identify, list, label. Questions that are didactic tend to be who, what, when, where, the classic journalism questions. And they're knowledge and comprehension questions like these. So if you ask one of these, you will not then see 20 minutes of fever pitch discussion ensue. You will get your answer right away and you will move on in the didactic mode. Now, if you're coaching, you might use verbs like these as task prompts, or if you're having a brief discussion, you might ask kids to look at cause and effect, compare, solve, categorize, infer, etc. A lot of times the questions kick off with how. How do we do this? That's when you're in coaching mode. So also there's application and analysis questions. And notice I keep harkening back to Bloom's taxonomy here. So how can you illustrate? How can you apply what you know? Compare and contrast? What were the motives? Now, when you're in maieutic or Socratic mode and you want kids to explore ideas, these are some of the verbs that you might be looking at. And these are the question stems. Why is a really key question stem if you want to get Socratic with your students. What if and should are also good question stems. This is a phase of analysis, synthesis, and evaluation, the highest part of Bloom's taxonomy, compelling the student to reason, plan, make conjectures, support with evidence. So, you're developing Socratic questions. How do you know that they're Socratic? Here's a quick rubric for you to go through. First of all, there should be an element of doubt regarding the answer to the question. It should be debatable. And the question should be answerable based on what is stated in the text or resource. And that resource can be a TED Talk, a video of some sort, an image, any shared resource or text. The question should deal with the crucial elements of one text or another. The question ought to be clear and concise. And the question should be fascinating to you, the discussion leader. Or if you can assign a student to be a leader, it should be fascinating to the student and worth exploration. So, couple quick notes before we close this presentation. In order to craft a Socratic inquiry discussion, you need to make sure that there is a text or resource that is the shared basis. And students need to do some thoughtful engagement with it, reading and viewing, annotating, note-taking, close study. Because when you actually get into the Socratic inquiry and the live discussion or the actual discussion forum, you're doing an ongoing close study together. And if kids don't have the same resource, that's a problem because then everybody's bringing evidence from wherever. But you need to be all grounded in the same shared experience. And finally, here are some notes about how you can get ready for the session and how you can prepare the reading selection or the viewing selection of video. And that is it for our presentation. Keep in mind, these are the tactics to write a Socratic question. Ask your academic coordinator if you have any questions. Thanks for listening.